Oh my God, you guys, come in here and shut the door. There is a viral rumor that Karrueche might be getting back with Chris Brown. If you guys don't know, there is a video that went viral on Controlla. But all I want to say is, are y'all okay? Because the real ones know the history of Chris Brown. But let me say this, for those of y'all that don't, you are in for a treat, baby. We compiled... Actually, we don't even gotta say anything. You are about to go into one of the messiest love triangles we ever knew in current pop culture: Rihanna, Karrueche Tran, and Chris Brown. And when we say that Chris Brown played on Karrueche's last nerve, and baby, she would have to be super, super down bad to ever consider, baby, we aren't. But if you want a little gossip nostalgia and the insight with some details, baby, let's MF and go. Hit that like button and come in here. Let's go.
Y'all know what is a love triangle we just do not talk about enough? The very infamous love triangle between Chris Brown, Karrueche, and Rihanna. Now look, we all know that it happened, but do you know what happened? Because not only is this love triangle messy, but it was dangerous for multiple people involved, not just Rihanna. We even have a smidgen of racism in there. So let's get into it. All right, so in 2009, of course, we know infamously that Chris Brown and Rihanna get into an altercation in a vehicle where he ends up assaulting her. He is ordered to stay, I believe, 50 feet away from her at all times, even if she doesn't want him to. In 2010, Karrueche is working at Nordstrom in Los Angeles. She's trying to become a celebrity stylist, and on one of these jobs, she ends up meeting Chris Brown. They go public in 2011. In February 2012, Chris Brown, while he's still dating Karrueche, would go on to wish Rihanna a happy birthday via Twitter, to which she retweeted it and said thanks. Just a month later, Rihanna would go on to post this to Instagram. It is a photo of a pack of rice cakes with some hoop earrings on, saying, "I'ma make you my B word." A lot of people thought that this was about Karrueche and that it was potentially very, very racist. And can we also just take a moment to acknowledge that Ariana Grande liked this photo back in the day? Big, big yikes. After this, Karrueche ends up upping her security detail. She had been receiving threats from Rihanna's fans, and I don't blame her. August 2012, Rihanna does the very infamous Oprah interview. Mind you, Karrueche and Chris Brown are still dating. In this interview, Rihanna basically breaks down. She tells Oprah that she's still very much in love with Chris, that they love each other very much and probably always will, but that right now they're just very, very close friends. Right after the interview airs, Karrueche goes on Twitter and she tweets, "If you don't have trust, you don't have anything." A month later, Chris Brown has to go to court for a substance-related charge. Karrueche and Chris are not only still together, they're living together. Rihanna goes to Twitter and she says, "Praying for you, baby," and she wishes him the best. Chris Brown retweets it and says, "Thank you so much." Karrueche must really be one of God's strongest soldiers, because the way I would have been long gone. I cannot imagine the amount and the level of gaslighting that must have been going on for Chris to convince her that all of this was a friendship. In October 2012, Melissa Ford, who is Rihanna's lifelong best friend, has a small Instagram feud with one of Karrueche's fans, and she goes on this Instagram rant. Now y'all can pause to read the whole thing. I'm not gonna read it. I mostly included this so that we can talk about the fact that she also calls Karrueche rice cake. It lends a lot of credence to the theory that this was targeted towards Karrueche and her race. Right around this time, Chris and Rihanna are spotted at a nightclub in New York City. Chris is then spotted leaving Rihanna's hotel just a couple minutes before she did. A couple days later, Chris Brown would go on to break up with Karrueche and make a public statement saying that he didn't want his friendship with Rihanna to hurt Karrueche because he loves her very much. Where is the logic in that? Immediately after that, Rihanna would go to Twitter to tweet, "Ain't nobody business but mine and my baby." Now look, no shade to Rihanna, because I fully believe she was a victim in this, but respectfully, she was a bully and she was messy as hell. After this, Chris Brown would go on to drop this promo video. It's very short, but he's talking to the camera very candidly. He's obviously very intoxicated, and he's asking is it possible to be in love with two people? He never mentions them by name, but he says, "I'm not trying to be a player. I'm not trying to be a dog." He's like, "My problem is that I just care too much. I care too much sometimes." Christmas Day 2012, Chris Brown tells Karrueche that he is going to the store. Karrueche stays at home. While Karrueche's watching TV, she sees Chris Brown at a Lakers game courtside with Rihanna. And that is where these pictures originate from, including this meme. This was their very first public appearance since the 2009 altercation. Not only that, but Chris Brown had been ordered to stay away from Rihanna, and he was still serving probation. So this was huge. It was a huge deal. It was all over the media. Did he think that Karrueche just would not know? Rihanna's fans would go on to bully Karrueche a lot after this, and Karrueche ends up breaking things off with Chris Brown. Chris and Rihanna would go on to date for like a couple more months after that basketball game until in May 2013, Chris and Karrueche would get back together. And that's basically where things end for the Rihanna, Karrueche, Chris Brown love triangle. However, the relationship between Karrueche and Chris Brown would only get messier from here. It would only get more and more dangerous. And they would go on to date for about 2 more years, and then eventually Karrueche ends up getting a restraining order on Chris Brown. So much of it also ends up being played out on social media, so we have a lot of proof of how messy it actually was. So if y'all want to know what happened between the years of 2013 and 2017 between Karrueche and Chris Brown, let me know and I will do a part 2 for y'all. And if you like content like this, make sure you follow along and check out my other celebrity content videos.
Okay, you guys, there is a part 2, but really quick, in case you guys are interested in more of her deep dives, because she does a great job of compiling information. Her name is Clementine, Clemytine, on TikTok and also on Insta. Okay, let's get back into it.
All right, y'all, we are back with part 2. This is the timeline of Karrueche and Chris Brown's relationship after Rihanna. If you want to learn more about Rihanna, Karrueche, and Chris's super duper messy love triangle, click into this comment. It'll take you to the previous video I made, and then you can come back to this one. So we left off in December 2012. Chris Brown and Rihanna are seen courtside at a Lakers game. Karrueche sees them on TV. Her and Chris Brown break up. Rihanna and Chris Brown would go on to date for a couple months after that, but then in May 2013, Chris and Karrueche get back together. Things are quiet for a couple months, and then Chris ends up getting into an altercation with 2 men outside of a hotel. This would start like a domino effect for a little bit, where Chris Brown would actually be sentenced to go to rehab. He would get kicked out due to violent behavior. He would get sent to anger management. Then he went back to rehab and he got kicked out again that second time, allegedly because he cheated on Karrueche while he was in there. Chris and Karrueche split up. Now, because being in rehab was part of his probation and he couldn't complete that, in March 2014, Chris would get sent off to jail. Now, while Chris is in jail, Karrueche and Chris get back together. In August 2014, they end up splitting up again. By this point, Chris Brown is out of jail. But the initial reports suggest that Karrueche was able to see that Chris liked several photos of him and Rihanna together on Instagram. Like, I know y'all remember when Instagram allowed you to see what your friends were commenting and liking on other people's photos? Yeah, like that. Like, this was one of the photos. It is important to note that the same day that they split up, Chris Brown headed to Saint Tropez with what TMZ reports was one of Karrueche's friends and then a couple of his friends. Chris and Karrueche get back together a couple weeks later. December 2014, Chris Brown says during a live performance that he's single and he says F that B. 2 days later, he would go to Instagram to apologize to Karrueche. March 2015, it becomes public knowledge that Chris Brown has just fathered a baby by someone who was not Karrueche. This would be the last and final time that they would split, but it would not be the end of their legal troubles. Karrueche would go to Twitter to talk about how she can only take so much, and I don't disagree. In later interviews, Karrueche actually says that she found out about the baby through social media. He had been texting her like, hey, we need to talk in person. And immediately after is when she saw the post on social media. 2 days later, Karrueche would go on to post this photo to Instagram. Chris would go on to comment and then delete. And I quote, "Thirst Trap 101. Continue to be a lady, beautiful, ... You are perfect, ... Don't let the thought form from anger." And so like, don't let the THOT thought form from anger. Couple weeks after that post, she would go on to do an interview where she alleges that she truly thought that the relationship between Chris Brown and Rihanna was a friendship and nothing else. June 2015 is where their dynamic starts to sort of change. It's alleged that Chris was really wanting to get back with Karrueche and she was just kind of done with it. So in June, it's alleged that Chris starts showing up to a lot of places that Karrueche was at. This photo in particular is actually taken outside of a nightclub where Karrueche was at, and then it's alleged that Chris reserved the table right next to her. This forced her to leave because why would you want to be sitting next to him? And it's alleged that he follows her outside. It's alleged that they argue inside her SUV, and then it's alleged that he shows back up at her house and convinces her to go out to dinner with him. She sort of like begrudgingly agrees. They go back out to dinner and they end up arguing in public anyway. It was all covered by the media. I think what just gives me the chills about this photo is that Chris just looks so aggressive in this photo. A week later, Chris would go on Instagram to call out Karrueche for allegedly talking about him in interviews. Karrueche would go on to comment back, "Don't be mad at me because our relationship is over due to your lack of loyalty. You know what's weak? You forcing yourself into my car, my broken window, blowing up my phone, trying to shower me with gifts, man the F up and change the BS in your life like I've told you several times." Kris would also go on to respond by saying, "I'm eternally thankful for you for being a part of my life. I've learned so much from you. I wish you nothing but happiness and the best." He tags her at Karrueche, "All I was doing was trying to fight for the woman I love. Thanks, I learned a lot." October 2015, Karrueche does an interview where she admits that getting work has been hard after her public split with Chris Brown. January 2017, Karrueche posts a photo to Instagram that Soulja Boy comments like hard eyes on, and then he also likes the photo. Chris Brown did not like this at all. Chris and Soulja Boy would end up going back and forth on Instagram, like publicly beef. Nothing ever came of it, but I bring this up just because this is kind of where we start to see that Chris, one, really can't let go, but two, he has this idea in his head that he sort of owns Karrueche. And that was 2017. The fact that he's still beefing with Quavo over similar things in 2024, just about a month ago, is very telling. June 2017, it seems Karrueche has had enough. She ends up going in front of a judge where she is requesting a restraining order against Chris. This is the actual restraining order. And you can see here, she starts off by describing that several years ago, Chris punched her twice in the stomach and pushed her down a flight of stairs. However, more recently, since February 2017, she says that he threatened to unalive her, to others, to her. He threatened to harass her friends. Karrueche alleges that this began because he was demanding gifts back. And these are more of those allegations. Y'all can pause to read it. After a couple failed attempts at serving him, Karrueche would be granted a 5-year restraining order. This restraining order also covered her younger brother and her mom. Chris would make a statement on Instagram basically saying, "Make sure that y'all don't listen to this BS." He said, "What all of those people on the outside are doing, let them do what they're doing. I don't know what the F they're talking about." And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, April 2024, Chris Brown gets into more beef with Quavo because of his alleged relationship with Karrueche. I will make a follow-up video on that, kind of going over the beef very similarly to what I did with Kendrick and Drake. You can check that out on my page. And if you like more content like this, make sure that you follow along, and you can go check out my other celebrity content videos.